Hi, I'm Timothy. This is Scalable Structured Markup. Who here knows what that means? A couple of you. All right, well, I added another title because I thought maybe I'd make it a little bit more clear what this talk is really about. And it's about putting more knowledge into your site. I think that's a really interesting idea. And over this, the length of this talk, we're going to look at different ways to do that. We'll see that putting more knowledge into your site can be as simple as just identifying the data that is already there. And not adding anything new, just be like, this is what it is. The richer the markup, the more control you have over how your site appears, and the more cool things that can be done with that data. By the end of the session, you'll be able to mark up your pages so that they can appear in search engine results pages with rich snippets. You'll be able to test that markup, and you'll be able to tell Google how often it should crawl certain pages and when things change. This is all about getting more control over your site, how your site appears in search results, and when it gets updated. And of course, at the end of the talk, I'll give a better understanding of maybe where this is all going. Does that sound like fun? You all just had lunch, didn't you? All right, so here's some interesting bits of information. Up there are the hashtags. If you would like to tweet this session, I encourage you to do so. These are some hashtags to identify your tweet. Also, there's a link for feedback. I'd love to hear how you feel about the session. And there's a link to where the session is going to live after today. That's me. Hello. I'm a developer advocate at Google. And you can find me online, and you can @mention me, Timothy Jordan. All right, so today this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to look at the past, where this has all come from. We're going to look at the present, using rich snippets and using sitemaps. And we're going to look at the future, what's next for all of this markup. So, the past. This is how the web looked, I don't know, circa 2000 or so. You edited some pages, you uploaded them to your server, made a website. Google crawled those pages when it felt like it, and returned links to your pages as appropriate on the search engine results page. The problem was that the snippets on the results page were relatively boring. I mean, they were a good summary of the page, but they didn't share the richness of what those pages actually had on them. Every page looked the same, and you had no control over how it looked. So the question was, how could you get more control over the search engine results page? How could you get it to know more about your site? And how could it provide that knowledge to the user? That brings us to today, the present. Your site probably looks more like this, right? You've got a database on the back end that drives your pages. You can mark up those pages identifying the data that's already there. Google, when it crawls those pages, can then see what's on those pages, what actually those items are, and it can display those to the user in an interesting way. Maybe that page is a recipe page. It can show a recipe snippet. It can add ratings where they exist. It's the richness of that data that you get a say in now. And we can do some other cool things with that data that we'll look at a little bit later. All right, so let's talk about rich snippets. We'll dive into this topic. Rich snippets have been around for about 2 years. In fact, 2 years, 2 days from now. And over that time, you can see I have a timeline because this is a presentation and you need a timeline. On my timeline, you can see that over the last 2 years, we've been steadily introducing different types of rich snippets. And we've been introducing different ways for you to mark up those snippets that we recognize and will crawl. From recipes to events to prayer times last week. So here's a couple examples. This is a search for stuffing. And you can see I'm looking for stuffing, and I get this response. This is on the whole page. This is one of the responses, and you can see the richness of the data in this snippet. You've got a rating, and we know how many reviews that rating comes from. We've also got a clear description there as well. So when the user looks and sees, summary, summary, and then a rich snippet that really stands out to them. Here's another example. I did a search for drooling dog barbecue, and of course I got 26 reviews, and I also have a price range, what you can expect to pay at this restaurant. And I've got breadcrumbs, which locate this page in that site. We know that this is a barbecue restaurant, yeah? And we could probably also navigate to other barbecue restaurants. And in some cases, we can combine rich snippet data with other data we find to further increase the richness of the experience. And you see a really nice description at the top, and you also see some other data that we found, like an image and other places where this is listed. So those are rich snippets, and you can see the value of this to your user, and you can see how that would translate into more traffic and a better experience. All right, so let's drill deep. Let's look at some markup types. Now, with standards in general, there's always very strong opinions about which is best, yeah? And I'm not going to tell you which is best, but I'm going to give you some pros and cons for 3 types that we read and will scan for when we're looking for structured markup on web pages. The first of which comes from RDA. And RDA has a really great design. It comes from XML tradition, and it's very general. You can express a lot of different things with RDF. There's RDF-A that does an attribute level mapping of RDF to XHTML. And that's cool. So you get all the power and design of RDF. The problem, though, is that sometimes this can be a little confusing to write. And in fact, in user studies with webmasters, they found that the nesting structure of RDF-A to be particularly confusing. That's when, say, you have an entity such as an event, which includes an entity such as a location. That's nested with inside the event. That particular markup can be a little confusing. Another option is microformats, and this is just a different place to start. Publishers generally say this is easier to identify their data in existing HTML docs using microformats, but it's not as general as RDFA, so you can't express as many things. And there's one more, microdata. And microdata has the general expression of entities like RDFA, but it also maps more easily to HTML. And this is my preferred method. Yeah? I like it mostly because when I'm reading an HTML document, I can parse this easier. And so maybe that's just a personal preference. This is the one that I'll be using in examples today. Speaking of which, let's take a look at an example. I want to give you a URL first, and this is the rich snippet testing tool. It's at /webmasters/tools/rich snippets. It's a really cool tool. You can go there and put in any URL, and it'll tell you what data that it finds and gives you an example rich snippet if it can find enough data to construct one. Also, on the left of that page is a link to our documentation, which will clearly list out all the different types of structured markup that we'll look to and map to a rich snippet, and what are the different parameters that are required and optional. And it also gives examples for each. And again, this is what a rich snippet looks like. We're going to do an event. These are the properties for the event. I'll come back to this table several times, so don't worry about copying it down real quick. But you can see there's a number of different properties, and they're all pretty straightforward, from summary to URL to location. This is a page without markup. And it's, as we would expect, a very simple HTML page to be. We've got some data, and we've got some very, very basic formatting with line breaks. I'm going to take a look at this page in the Snippet tool, just to get a default baseline expectation. So I've got structured-markup.appspot.com. This is just a static App Engine site. So I've thrown some static files onto App Engine so that you can play with them if you'd like. You want this URL? Oh, you want it bigger. How's that? OK, thank you. The no markup page looks like this. And you can see it's very basic. I just have some line breaks in there. It's not pretty at all. I wanted to make sure it was super basic so that we could see the markup as it gets in there. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL and paste it into the Rich Snippets testing tool. And you can see there's insufficient data to generate the preview. That's what we'd expect, right? We don't expect it to find anything because, well, there's nothing to find there. So let's take a look at it with some data. I'm going to add in 3 bits of data, the 2 required types and 1 of the recommended types. And I really strongly recommend you add a location to your event as well. We've got a summary up at the top. That's required. And we've got the start date down there in the center, also required. And the location, of course, is where this event is taking place. And that's going to be a nested entity. Adding the markup, it looks like this. And let me take you through it line by line. At the top, we've got an item scope. That item scope is super important and really basic. If you have a div tag or any tag that surrounds all the data for that entity, that's where you put the item scope attribute. And it's going to tell readers that everything inside, everything a child of that tag, is the scope of this item. Does that make sense? Oh, good. There's nodding. I like that. The next thing is we've got an item type. Just got to clearly indicate what kind of entity this is. In this case, it's an event. Now we've got item props. This is the item property. We've got 3, as I mentioned, summary, start date, and location. And the data contained in those tags corresponds to that parameter, that property. Let's take a look at the nested one down here at the bottom. You'll notice that I have, next to the item prop location, another item scope and item type. Since it's nested, we're going to add another entity inside that parent entity. So it'll need an item scope and an item type to indicate it. In this case, we're going to list an organization as the location of this event. And of course, it has an item prop. I've just added one, the name. That's required. So let's take a look at this live. I like saying that. Over here, I'm going to go to the required markup link, and it looks like this. Notice, it's the same web page. I'm going to copy this and paste it into the Rich Snippets testing tool, and you'll see we have new output. We've got here in the center the Google search preview. So if we were to return a rich snippet in the search engine results page, it might look something like this. And down at the bottom is my favorite part. It tells us all the data that it found. So if we thought we were marking something up and it's not listed here, there's a problem somewhere along the way. Likely we put in the wrong item prop, or we put that attribute in the wrong place, or was looking for the value somewhere else. And so at this point, we'd look back at our code and see if we could find the error. Really straightforward, right? Okay. All right, let's add in a few more properties. And you'll notice some of these properties are going to change how the rich snippet looks, and some of them aren't. But since we have the data, we might as well mark it all up. So in this case, I'm going to add a URL, the description, the end date, and the event type. All of that data was already on the page, so I'm just going to mark it up. And it'll look like something like this. And you can see I've added the description right there, added the item prop and a span. I've added the end date. Both those dates have the ISO time and then a readable time. And down here at the location, I have the locality. Oh, and an event type down there at the bottom. And we'll take a look at what this looks like. So you can see a couple things have changed. One, I have a lot more data down at the bottom. Another, up at the search preview, you can see it's added the locality to the location. So a number of things didn't make it to the snippet, but it's still good that we've indicated to the world that those are on the page, and maybe we can take use of those in the future. But then some things do update the snippet. See how that works? And all I've done is added a few attributes and a couple span tags to surround data. I've not added anything to the page other than markup. So let's talk about scaling. This is the easy part, actually. If you've got a site like this, where a database backs your pages, and hopefully that database is a field-level database that looks something like this, then it's easy. Likely you're not writing your pages, you're editing templates. So where we have the summary, location, and start date in an event field in some database, we can just add those to the template and make sure that the markup's there. When we change the template for, say, product pages, maybe there's 5,000 of them on our site, but one template, we mark up that one template, and all of those product pages get the markup. Right? This is kind of obvious, but I think it's important to note that when you edit your templates to include this markup, you've added it to your whole site. Another thing is sitemaps. This is also kind of a scaling issue, and we'll get to that. This is where we are. We've got a database driving a site, driving the Google index, driving search results. And the Google index will find pages on our site as it can and when it can. But wouldn't it be cool if we could tell Google what pages are on our site? These are all the pages I want you to know about. Wouldn't it be also cool if we could tell it, these pages change daily, or these pages change weekly? And that's what sitemaps are about, and they've been around for a while. Essentially, you've got your database driving your sitemap, and your sitemap goes to the Google index, and then Google knows when to look for new data and where to look for new data on your site. Let's take a quick look at an example here. First off, links. Super important to have links. Sitemaps.org is where you can go for the spec that Google and other search engines use. And you can use /webmasters/tools to get a little bit more control over the sitemaps that Google sees. A typical sitemap has these properties. You've got a URL set that encapsulates everything, and then you've got URL entries. And in those URL entries, you may indicate the location, the last modified date, the change frequency, and the priority of the page. All these are really straightforward. The one that I do want to mention particularly is the priority. This is a scale from 0 to 1, and by default, it's 0.5. And they're relative to each other. So if you list all your pages at 1, you haven't really done anything. But if you tell Google, this page I want you to have a bit more priority for, say, my home page, right? Then maybe some of these product pages that are only updating monthly. And this is what the example might look like. So I've just added in the home URL of the examples I've been using so far on App Engine. I've added in a date that it changes daily, and I've added the default priority. And of course, this is really easy to expand to include the other pages on my site as well. And maybe once I add those, I realize my home page is a 0.8, and these other pages are a 0.7, just slightly less in priority. And that slide came a little bit early. I want to introduce something really, really cool, but first let's look at the tool, which is here. So I've got a couple websites in Webmaster Tools. And I go to Site Configurations and Sitemaps. Now, in Webmaster Tools, before you can start doing anything, you need to have your site claimed. That site needs to be yours. And that's so not anybody else in the world can start telling Google about your site for you when you don't want them to. And that can be as simple as adding a little file in the root directory of your website. Google scans that and knows that you have write access to your server. Once we've done that, we can submit sitemaps. And that's what I've done here. I've gone to submit a sitemap, and I've entered in my URL, and that sitemap appears. And every time that sitemap changes, I can come back to Webmaster Tools and hit resubmit. Just check mark next to that sitemap and hit resubmit. That's cool. Google will know the data that I want available, and it'll know when I feel it should take a look at that data. You can do sitemaps with feeds as well, which is pretty cool. And once you start using feeds, you might start to think, wouldn't it be cool if Google could know about my data on my website as it changes? I've got a database backing a feed. That feed updates as my database changes. It would be cool if Google would know every time that happens. And that's the slide I showed you. We have another thing available to us called PubSubHubbub. Who here knows what PubSubHubbub is? A lot of you. Well, that's great. So I've got a bunch of slides that are going to be reviewed for all of you that raised your hands. We're introducing today that our sitemaps and Webmaster Tools will support PubSubHubbub. So when you put a hub in your feed for the sitemap of your site, Google will read that and subscribe to that feed and get those real-time updates. It will then know that your site and that sitemap are ready to crawl. It pretty much looks like this. You have the sitemap, you add in PubSubHubbub so that a fat ping just hits Google every time something happens, and then Google knows that your site is updated and can check it when it can. All right, I'm going to go through PubSubHubbub quickly because there were a lot of hands. But slow me down if you don't get anything. PubSubHubbub is a really straightforward protocol that solves a very specific problem. If you have a feed, and I want quick, timely updates about that feed, before PubSubHubbub, what I would do is poll that feed. Every 30 seconds or 10 seconds, I would download that feed again. I would say, has anything changed? If nothing's changed, then I don't do anything. If something has changed, maybe I bubble that up to a user-facing action. But the problem here is that you have lots of publishers and subscribers. And let's say 1,000 subscribers to one publisher. And all of them are asking every 30 seconds, are we there yet? Right? This would be annoying for a road trip, and it's annoying on the internet as well. Wouldn't it be cool if the publisher can just tell the subscriber, yes, we're there? And that's what PubSubHubbub does. It works with three things: a publisher, a subscriber, and a hub. Right, you get it? PubSubHub. And of course, the bub is just for fun. What will happen is the subscriber will ask the publisher, can I have your feed? The publisher will respond and include a link to their hub. If the subscriber is PubSubHubbub aware, it will then subscribe to that hub. And this hub will do a little bit of a dance to verify that the subscriber actually was subscribing and it wasn't an attack to overload them with data. So it'll just say, are you sure you wanted this? The subscriber will say yes. From then on, the publisher is going to send data to the hub. And it's going to do it one of two ways. Either the publisher will notify the hub directly, or the hub will continually poll the publisher in that polling method, which isn't a big deal now because now there's just one person polling, and that person can do it at a much higher frequency. And that publisher will give it the data. Once the hub has the data, it sends it to the subscriber. That's it. It just pushes out a fat ping in a post. This is your data. This is the update to this feed. So what will happen is when your site has an Atom feed and it has a link to a hub, when Google subscribes to that, every time you make a change to your database and that gets updated in your feed, that feed will push out to the hub that will then push out to Google right through. Pretty cool, huh? And Google will then know that it can recrawl your site. And of course, this works. PubSubHubbub is a great protocol that works at scale too, so it can work with a huge number of subscribers. Let's take a look at a quick feed. This is an Atom feed with a link, which is just right up there. It's a link, a rel link to the hub. And this is actually a live feed. If I go to I made a blog. It doesn't really have anything interesting on it, except for our purposes, this link down here. Blogger, as it turns out, has an Atom feed by default that includes PubSubHubbub. So I can actually take this link and go to Webmaster Tools, and you see I've added in that link to that feed, and it is subscribed through PubSubHubbub. I was actually playing with this last night. I would post a new message on my blog, and then sometime later I would just see it automatically show up here. Pretty cool, huh? So that's pretty much all you need. You create a sitemap feed, and that can be in RSS, MRSS, or Atom. Use a hub, a PubSubHubbub hub, and indicate that in the feed. And then add the link in Webmaster Tools. Data in Webmaster Tools, by the way, is updated after Google crawls the site. So there may be some delay in actually updating your blog and seeing that in Webmaster Tools. Don't expect it just to pop up. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the future. What's next? So this is us with rich snippets and PubSubHubbub sitemaps. We've got a database-backed website that pushes to the content of our pages. And that markup is also structured so that those entities are identified on those pages. The database also updates a sitemap so Google knows what our content is and when it changes. And then we've got this cool stuff over in the search engine results page. And what we can expect in the future, for sure, is more rich snippet types, perhaps. We just added prayer times, and there's a lot of different discrete entities that would be cool and interesting to show in the search engine results page. But we're also going to do more with that data. For example, we can include that data in vertical searches, and we've just recently released this feature. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I had a screenshot earlier of a stuffing search. You'll notice when I look down here at the left, I can narrow my search by ingredients. And that's because these webmasters have identified the ingredients in their recipes with structured markup. So as I select, say, I don't know, turkey, maybe I don't have turkey. Maybe I have sherry, and maybe I have steak. Here is a grilled flank steak with mushroom stuffing. That sounds fantastic. And I can indicate I don't have more than 60 minutes. Apparently, that takes a while to cook. Or the other fear is that doesn't exist for my diet. You can see how this is really cool, that we can do not just rich snippets. Not only do you get more control over how you look in search engine results, but we can do cool new things with that data, like this vertical search with recipes. And it all starts here. By mirroring the data in your database on both your web pages and your sitemap, and on those web pages using structured markup, your website becomes more like your database. By telling Google this right away, that data is more known and more useful and available for your users. The more this happens, the more the whole web starts to become more of a database, the more we can start to do really cool things with that data. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so to summarize, the practical elements of this talk is markup is super easy. You don't have to add anything new to your site. You just have to tell us what it is. Scaling is pretty straightforward. All you really need to do is edit your templates instead of the end pages. Markup is good. Yeah? Rich snippets are really cool, and vertical searches are really cool, and users appreciate them. Not only that, but you have more control. You now get to tell Google what data is there using sitemaps and using structured data, what data is actually on the page, and what pages have data. And of course, the sitemap tells Google what pages should be crawled and when they've changed so that it can update them. And this all leads, again, this practical application that happens today is more control over how you appear. Rich snippets and sitemaps give you that. It allows you to control traffic and engagement, and it gives you more control so that using that control, people know what's so great about your pages. You let your users see the richness of every page when they're looking for them. And I think that's pretty neat. All right, that's pretty much all I have to say on that, except for the answers to any questions you may have. I hope that was interesting and straightforward, but I would love to talk about it further. So we have a microphone in the center and a microphone way over there. And if you want to go up and ask some questions, I'm here to answer them. And we have some other Googlers who are experts in this area here and available to answer as well. Daniel up here might be popping up and saying hello. Yes?
So if we've got a new kind of entity that we wish Google would make into a rich snippet.
Yes.
We happen to be a real estate site. We would like, 3 beds, 4 baths to appear in the rich snippet. My understanding, we need to build an industry consortium to make a standard around the microformat. Is that step 1?
Well, there's 2 things. One is being able to identify the data, and yes, you've indicated that, right? Like having microformats or microdata able to specify that is great. And microformats and RDFA are really good for this because they're already pretty general. The other thing is convincing Google that that would be like good for the users. And so the best step there is to go to the Webmaster Forum and make it known. This is a rich snippet that we think would be really valuable to the users, and we're ready to mark this up. Or we've already marked our pages up with this. Did you add anything to that? We can share a mic.
I've never talked to your chefs before.
I'm sure they can bring up a mic in a sec, but I'll hand this over to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a great direction that we want to pursue in the future. One of the great things about both RDFA and microdata is that you don't have to form an industry consortium. You can mark up the data that you already have on your page in a form that makes sense to you. That starts the conversation, right? That starts the conversation when you post a link in a Webmaster forum. That starts a conversation with other webmasters about what data is interesting to other sites. It starts a conversation with Google about what you're able to mark up. So I would say that that's the beginning, and thanks a lot. Over time we'll have better answers to this question. It's a critical part of the world to mark up more entities. Great.
So with that one, you have to hold closer. Hello. Hello. Shall we step
Well,
up here?
I'm certainly open to the idea that what you just described is, you should just mark up your site and then post on the forums. Maybe someone will notice. I'm not sure someone's going to notice. A random post on the Webmasters forums?
Really? No.
I read the forums.
All of them? They get a little noisy sometimes.
Seriously, there are a lot of people at Google who do read the forums. But yes, I think you've really highlighted an issue that this is a person-to-person negotiation right now, right? That part is not scalable. That's why Timothy's talk on scalable structured markup didn't include that topic. So yes, it's socialization. It is developing a groundswell of support. But we recognize that that's not ideal. So we look forward to coming up with better answers to that over time. It's a serious problem that we recognize.
Better answer is microformats.org. That's the entire role of
That is an industry consortium. I need to build an industry consortium of people who agree.
It's not an industry consortium. It's a wiki page you go to and the process that says...
Okay, I'll post on a forum and I'll post on a wiki. Maybe someone will notice.
Clearly, we all feel passionately about this. We don't all have microphones.
All right.
So please, yes, please come up afterwards and chat.
Yeah.
Would love to have a longer conversation with you about how to make that work better.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, please do.
Seriously, read the microformats.org process page. That tells you how to do this in a way that will help people agree with you.
All right, let's go over here for the next question.
Yeah. A common response that I see on my test page, or the testing tool that you have is we couldn't find the subject of your page. So I've included maybe too much structured markup, and I wasn't able to tell to tell you the exact subject of the page. Say it's a profile page for a person, and I really want this to be the highlighted noun, and I included too many of Spinal Tap's upcoming concerts in the sidebar and videos or whatever else. So what do you recommend for highlighting, it could be an area role or something, the subject of the noun that you really care about for that page?
That's a very good question. I don't have an immediate answer to you.
Yeah. That markup, ideally, in a large scalable site, right? You have records in your database, as Timothy described. You have records in your database that describe, that back each part of the page. Focus on, what, that page is about. Focus on the record, that backs it. This markup is really specialized right now to pages that have, that are single item pages. It's possible to do more, but honestly, Google isn't so good at that right today.
That's a really good point. When you mark up your pages, do you open up the Webmaster Help Center article for that rich snippet type and try and hit that, or do you just add the data?
Yeah, and I go to your datavocabulary.org and read the exact spec to what I should be putting on there.
So datavocabulary.org is great, but if your goal is rich snippets, at least in my personal experience, editing and adding the structured markup, the Webmaster Help Center pages will give you an example of this is a snippet that could give a rich snippet on search engine results pages. Does that make sense? Right, whereas data vocabulary is the spec and it's everything you can do. The Webmaster page will say, this is something this is a good example of a page that would get a rich snippet.
It sounds like you have a particular problem that we're not serving very well. So
I think I'm too expressive, and you're asking me to just dumb it down for you. And so I'm wondering how.
That's hard.
And so I'm wondering how do you change over time? I've heard they notice when something comes up in the testing tool that didn't quite work out, kind of like the forums question. Do you tend to see that happened? So if I list Spinal Tap and I say bands like Spinal Tap, and each of those has a little person markup within them, but the main object is Spinal Tap, and there's so many different things you can do where it's all valid markup, it's all very descriptive, but it might take away from you finding the exact subject of the page.
So to Daniel's point, yeah, it sounds like that there is a conversation to be had here, and there's some changes that we could make to better address your use case. So if you wouldn't mind, let's come up afterwards and we'll talk about it in more depth. Yes?
I want to thank you for the prayer times rich snippet.
Oh,
It's
you're
really
welcome.
cool. I saw the talk this morning about Places API from Geo. So the question, of course, is how do we add the places information and inform through the Webmaster site tools?
So I'm not sure that I grasp your question, but
I think the question is, how can you add in places information?
Places API that they announced this morning on Google Maps.
So what's the end goal? What is, by
So-
adding in this information,
so
what do you want to
you're-
see happen?
So if I have a website that has got different events at different locations or places that I manage and control, so I can upload that information.
So there are a number of different ways that you can address that problem, and one of the ways is to add structured markup. And I believe there is another way that we can get local information to Google as well.
yes, the local story, there are a couple of different ways to provide local information. One is through Google Places itself. There's a feed format
Okay.
for local places. So if you want to use the Places API today, that's probably the best place to do that.
Okay.
If your audience is more a broader web audience, today the best place to do that would be markup on a web page.
Thank you.
Thank you. And over here.
Hi, I'm curious how many of the new HTML5 tags will Google search engine recognize, like article, section, nav, footer, header, things like that?
In general, we'd like to use as much data as available, right? And that includes all different kinds of markup types. And when we find a good use case for that, then we'll start reading it in. I don't have any specific information beyond that today.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is there's a difference between the level of structure that's expressed and the level of richness that's expressed in those HTML5 standard tags and those that are really necessary to hoist more information onto the search results page to make your page stand out, to make your site stand out. There really isn't much that we have been able to do with the article tags as they're used on the web today, because many people use them, incorrectly, or use them even on things that aren't articles and so on. So that's something that we're continuously looking at in search to see how we can use them.
Hi, I was wondering if you know to what degree some of these technologies like rich snippet support and PubSubHubbub are supported in products like the Google Search Appliance for intranet searching, so we can do this kind of thing with our local content.
So maybe you could speak to the search appliance, but for like custom search engine, you definitely can use rich snippets to affect how those look on your own custom search engine. And in fact, we take it even a level further with custom search engine and give you even more control over how everything looks using page maps. That's the one.
Sorry, I don't know about how this relates to the Google Search Appliance, but I could take your card afterwards and put you in touch with someone who might.
Okay, thank you.
If we were to add a PubSubHubbub sitemap feed, should we then remove the old style standard sitemap, or should we keep both?
Well, so not everybody out there is going to support the feed and PubSubHubbub. So it makes more sense to include both and just have your database drive them so you don't need to worry about them, and then tell Google about the one that you want Google to use.
Got it. So Google's crawler can use both, and you can say opt for this one.
Yes.
Okay. And
just indicate that in Webmaster Tools which one you want Google to use.
Right. I think that I've noticed in the past that we put a lot of links in our sitemap, and Google will crawl some of them, but not necessarily all of them. If we use PubSubHubbub, is that a good way to make sure that at least the freshest stuff gets crawled more consistently, or does it not necessarily impact that?
Right now, it doesn't impact that at all. But one of the advantages of PubSubHubbub is that Google has tighter correlation between when pages change on your site and when we know pages change on your site. So that puts us in a situation where we can over time learn better page change rates than we can right now. So from a practical perspective, it won't help you get those pages indexed faster right today, but it puts us on a path where we can do that in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, Monica.
Hello. So I love the support for microdata. I was wondering if Google would consider ever supporting the Open Graph vocabulary with microdata. And in general, if you're going to be supporting the Open Graph protocol via meta tags at all for this rich snippets.
Go for it.
Yeah. So Open Graph Protocol is a type of RDFA. It is a subset of RDFA. So from a markup language perspective, there's really no barrier. One of the deal, as Timothy described it, for rich snippets is, a site describes what their site is about in more detail, and in exchange, the site gets richer results in search. So right now, Open Graph Protocol is not ideal for expressing what a site is actually about, right? It's very UI driven, with the exception of locations and the new effort in products. It's really focused on here's an image, here's a title, here's a description, here's a URL, and we found over time that that doesn't, communicating with users in a search engine at that level doesn't help people make decisions of what to click on the search results page. I think that makes a lot of sense for the stream, but makes less sense on a search results page. On the search results page, having richer information about for instance ratings, for instance what the specifics that are encoded in a prayer time is much more useful, and so we haven't seen that benefit right now, but we're constantly looking, right? And there are a significant number of pages with Open Graph Markup, so there's a lot to look at.
Okay, great, thank you.
So Google tends to put less emphasis on invisible markup, things that are like in meta tags in the head. Yet, Rich Snippet supports things like meta elements inside of your item. So I'm wondering, how do you view a span versus a meta, for example, if you're to describe your data, and things that might not be very useful to visitors of your page, like the geo-coordinates or the war fields in your example, but could be interesting in your rich snippet data. So how do you weigh those decisions, and whether it just isn't ranked that highly when you view it and try and get information versus what's like not really useful to a visitor?
So I'll take a hack into that, and I'm sure Daniel will add, is that when you look at a page, the stuff that the user sees is generally a better indication of what that page is about to that user. And so in general, we encourage rich snippets to mark up data that is in fact visible to the user.
Yep, yeah, I would only add that, as you mentioned, in the case of, say, geo-coordinates, there are some cases where that doesn't apply so well. So we look at the information that's on a meta tag, but we really encourage it to mark up the content that the viewer sees.
Cool. Well, I guess we got no more questions for the microphones. We'll go ahead and end here. And I know and I think Daniel will be around for a little bit longer if you have any questions for us directly. Thank you so much.